So how are you going to be able to get funding in order to do these experiments and eventually have a private space station?
Well, hopefully someone watching this video will decide to write a big check. Seriously, what we expect is that between Professor Dice and myself and Lee Valentine, the chairman, Dr. Valentine is the chairman of the Space Studies Institute Board of Trustees, we know a number of substantial individuals, as they're called, very wealthy folks, and through a few degrees of separation, we probably know everybody who might be interested in funding an activity like this over the next couple of years. So we'll begin first by getting the word out, as we're doing with this announcement at the Space Access Conference. And then we'll take the usual steps of talking at scientific and technical conferences, making direct approaches to potential donors and so forth. And in the end, what we're looking for is one substantial individual to put their name on the project. It's a little bit like the naming rights to the X Prize or the naming rights to a football stadium, or building a building on the Stanford or Yale campuses, you know, and being able to say it's the Bill Gates building or the Paul Allen building or whatever. And then we also expect that whoever is the key donor is very likely, if they have an interest in doing this at all, they're very likely to drag their friends into it at a lesser level. Then at some point, once we get the facility built, we will make it available, a little bit like the Nature Conservancy buys property and then turns it over to state parks to run. We will make the facility available to national space programs, as well as to other private research institutes and so forth, who may wish to pay for its continuing operation or the actual launch, the supplying of astronauts, the supplying of cargo, the conduct of experiments, the training of researchers, and so forth. So the first few years will be all privately funded, and then it will transition to a public-private partnership.
If a national government or a commercial company were to contact you before you reached that stage and wanted to fund the project towards the development, would you accept that, or would you still wait until you privately funded the project and built the facility yourself before taking any sort of help from anyone?
Well, one should never say never, but my when faced with a rich opportunity like that, at the same time, we really would rather see the first few years kind of set up by private funding with private interests, because we feel that that is the best opportunity to have sort of an unconstrained and non-political program. Once it actually exists and it's been tested out on the ground and it's ready for flight, then I think that's the time to look for some component of public support. Obviously, if a very wealthy individual said, you know, I want to spend $500 million or whatever it might cost, and I have to hasten to say, we don't know today how much it will cost. That will be the very first activity that we undertake, a study to conceptualize both the budget and the facility itself. You know, then I'd be happy to take their money and fund it completely privately. But you know, I think that there will be some mix of support over the next decade.
Now, once the facility is built and reaches orbit, would it be robotically run, or would you have human crews on board running the experiments?
Well, that's somewhat of an open question, because there are roboticists we've met with who claim that they could teleoperate a significant part of the facility. I find it, having actually worked with animals myself 4 decades ago, I find it hard to believe, if you've ever picked up a squirming little mouse, that you can do this all robotically. So at the moment, our baseline concept is that it would have to be staffed permanently by humans, potentially as many as 4. 2 would be involved just in the maintenance of the facility and operations, and 2 would be the scientific staff.
Now, even though the project is still in the design phase, how much time are you giving yourself in order to complete the design phase before any sort of production begins?
Well, we see three phases of private development, privately funded development. Phase one is a study, which we think will take about 9 months. That's our current best estimate. Phase two, or phase B, is a design activity, which we currently budget at about 15 months, and this includes an engineering mock-up, the beginning of supporting ground-based gravitational biology labs to start building sort of the equivalent of ground truth, to understand how to do the experiments, how many animals you're going to need, and so forth. And then between 24 and 36 months of actual development and fabrication of the components, the centrifuge components of the pressure vessel components and so forth that will be necessary to fly. Then, when we go into this public-private partnership, is probably 6 months related to launch activities and ultimate commissioning on orbit, and then an initial 10-year program of operations. And all of these things, of course, depend on optimal funding. If there's a shortfall in funding, we may have to go into hibernation before we launch, and so forth.
Well, is there anything else that you would like to add, or
The only thing I would say is that surely this is an ambitious undertaking, but at the same time, if we don't begin to take these steps today, if we say, well, we don't need to think about this now, we can think about it 10 years from now, it just pushes out the results a further 10 years. One thing you cannot hasten is scientific research that requires an animal to live out its full lifespan. So you're going to go through generation after generation after generation to give yourself confidence that you're not, in 100 years' time, you're not going to find that settlers on Mars die after the second generation because of some biochemical anomaly that we couldn't identify until we actually went there and lived. So people say, let's think about this in the far future, to my mind, are missing the boat. We have to be thinking about it now in a measured, and prudent way, because it's going to take a long time to get the answer.